Hi, it's Pete here from See Your Toes Again, and this is podcast number 31. I have another guest today. Her name is Christine Trimpe, and she is going to tell us her story. She was obese since a child, basically. Imagine, if you can, that you ended up at 230 pounds, which is 105 kilograms or 16 stone. And imagine that your doctor says that you've got metabolic syndrome. You've got sleep apnea. You know that because you need to be connected to a CPAP every night. You've got fatty liver, and then you've been diagnosed with an ovarian cyst. Life's looking pretty darn grim. You can imagine then how she felt when she found out she could change all of this after over 30 years of struggling. She has managed to change all of this, and she's put all of those chronic diseases into remission, and she has lost a load of weight in the process. This is her story. Now, I've divided it into two podcasts because we chat for over an hour and a half, so I've made it into two 45-minute roughly podcasts. So this is number one, and podcast number 32 will directly follow. So sit back. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and if you have any situations like this, if you can relate, then I hope this gives you the incentive that you can do something about any problems that you have. Thank you very much. Hi, Christine. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm overjoyed to be here, Peter.
So I've met you on X. I often see your posts and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I guess as a big start, where you came from. Where were you right at the start, maybe?
At the start of showing up on X, which I still call Twitter.
So Twitter, it seems right? A bit weird.
Right.
Yeah, it seems a bit weird.
Very strange. Well, I showed up on Twitter before I went on this healing and weight loss journey. That's how we connected, through the low carb lifestyle. I call it my sugar-free lifestyle. But I showed up there because I had this story that was just like burning in my heart to share with people. I wanted them to find the same way out that I found after 30 years of hopelessness, 30 years of living with dietary dogma that failed me over and over again. When I finally found the key to unlocking my obesity, I believe that's the tagline of the book that the very first book I read, Dr. Jason Fung's The Obesity Code. It just opened a brand new door for me. And at that point, when I landed on this life-changing information, I had been struggling with being overweight, eventually being morbidly obese for 30 years, which is a long time. Yeah, which is I call them my wandering years, because it was always in my heart that I wanted to make a change. I knew I needed to make a change. I also was carrying, not besides the extra 100 weights that I was carrying, 100 pounds of weight, I was also carrying a ton of guilt and shame because I just could never get this right, could never get it right. So I made valiant efforts. I joined Weight Watchers over and over again. I actually did a liquid shake protein diet for 10 months, which, looking back on that, I cannot believe the resiliency I had to do that. And I didn't cheat once. I was very determined and very dedicated and very motivated, but there was such a huge piece of the puzzle that was missing. No one, even in that hospital liquid shake diet program, no one ever mentioned to me, no one discussed with me. They said, you have metabolic syndrome. They did not explain to me what was going on hormonally in my body, why I was struggling so much with all the signs and symptoms of metabolic syndrome. And it took my own digging to, finally find this key. Dr. Google, I give him credit for setting me on my way. But living in that lifestyle, living morbidly obese, is no way to live. And I knew I needed a way out. I wanted a way out. I finally found the key to the way out. And so that's why I started showing up on Twitter, because even as an introvert, I was like, people have to hear this. People have to know that there is hope. And Dr. Jason Fung gave me that hope when one of the first videos of his I watched when I discovered him, when he just looked into the camera and said, this is not your fault. This is not your fault. And I I remember having tears in my eyes that night. And I remember laying in bed that night just thinking, could this really not have entirely been my fault? And that's what got me moving forward. And I just have such a passion, Peter, for sharing. I mostly communicate with women. I coach women, but I show up on Twitter and I love to engage in the co-ed community. There is fun as well. But everybody needs to hear this news. Like, there is hope. There is hope for healing. There is a different way. And I want them to be able to do like I did and get off the mindset of all the dietary dogma and finally break free. So I did go on to lose a little over 100 pounds. I've been able to maintain a very low carb lifestyle this is going into my 7th year now. Okay. And yeah, that's where the freedom is. That's how we connected.
So how old would you have been when you sort of first felt that you were big?
That I was like, how, when you first been struggling with my weight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting question. Cause I actually was thinking about that this week because I was listening to another podcaster and she was talking about what the idea of like, when did the door of shame open for you in regards to your weight? And I think back all the way back to my childhood. I must have been probably about 3rd grade. Puberty was starting to come into play. And I remember being at a campfire with family friends. And I remember one of the men that we were camping with said, what happened to her? She used to be such a tiny thing. And that's my first memory of realizing that there was something wrong with me. There was something different about me.
Yeah.
And I was getting chubby. Yeah. I was getting chubby at that time. I had many years of chubbiness off and on throughout my puberty years and teenage years. And then I really began to pile on the weight when I went away to college. So I've been struggling with this for decades. Yeah.
Pretty much all of your life.
Yes, pretty much all of my life, right.
And all of your adult life, yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, certainly as a child like that, there's such a dogma, I read something just the other day, actually, on X, where the guys whoever it was said, there's no excuse for fat children. It's like, okay, sometimes that's the case, but I know personally, sometimes a child just is bigger than his or her sisters and brothers. It's just how they are. You can have a skinny sister and a larger sister. There's no difference. You're not treating them any differently. In fact, I got in trouble a few months ago on Facebook because I posted a thing that said, I don't think people who are overweight, I don't think it's necessarily their fault. I think it's that their metabolism is better than a skinny person's metabolism. Therefore, they eat the same number of calories, but they put weight on than the skinny person who eats the same calories, and let's face it, nothing happens. We all know that. We know the skinny people in the world who can eat tons of chocolate and it never touches them. And I got slammed for saying that because I was offering excuses for fat people. And that's where, of course, it's people like that where you end up, as you grow older, as you go through your teens, feeling like it is your fault and there's something wrong with you. It's almost like you've got some disease that you have full control over, but you're not doing anything about because you're just lazy.
Right. Exactly. And I don't think someone that drinks purely liquid protein shakes for 10 months is lazy. That's the furthest thing. I was not lazy. Like I said, I was so determined. I was so motivated. I knew that I would feel better if I could get the weight off. And I knew I could reverse the chronic health issues that were popping up. It just, I think the thing that failed me the most when I came off of those liquid shakes and they put me into maintenance is, again, not understanding that what they started refeeding me with or suggesting the whole wheat bread, the whole wheat pasta. You can have a half a baked potato. Well, I would stretch that and find the biggest potato in the grocery store so that I could bring it home and eat half
Yeah.
that baked potato, right? And so those types of things, I very quickly began putting weight back on, and I was devastated. It was soul crushing. Like I just went through this journey of calorie deprivation, 800 calories, living on 800 calories a day for 10 months. And now I'm starting to eat real food again and I'm gaining the weight back. What is wrong with me?
Yeah.
What is wrong with me?
800 calories, let's face it. I mean, that's really what they should be giving to people as a prison sentence. You know, you've committed murder, so we're going to put you on 800 calories to teach you a lesson. It's got to be horrible, hasn't it? Isn't it going to affect every part? Isn't it going to make you affect your brain and everything?
Yeah, like it was soul crushing. Just and still, when I think back to those days, I'm like, how in the world did I do that? I'm a very resilient person. I'm a type A, oldest child, oldest daughter. You know, I can do the thing. I can work the programs. I can work the programs without cheating. But it's when I was up against things like, okay, now you can have a potato now. Oh, goody. I love potatoes, or I used to love potatoes.
Yeah.
Or things like everything in moderation. Christine, you can have like, you haven't had any type of dessert in weeks. You know, it's your birthday. Have a hot fudge brownie cream puff. Okay, that's moderation, right? And that would cause me to, you know, it would kick in if I was in a particular diet program that I was trying to follow. It would kick in those cravings, those
Yeah.
crazy, insane cravings that would drive me to the point where, like, okay, I just ate something sweet. Now I know there's a half a bag of potato chips in the pantry. I'm going to go eat that as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So would you suggest that there's a level of binging involved? It's almost like an alcoholic who says, "Oh, well, I'll just have a drink."
Yes, absolutely. I definitely, you know, I never would have used that word binging in the past about myself because that word is just sounds scary. I never was a purger, but I would punish myself for the next 3 days and go back to severe calorie restriction when at that time I wasn't a fat burner. So it was maddening. It was deprivation. So yeah, it was a punishment for myself.
I did realize, and I said this in my previous podcast, number 30, I was talking to a lady called Ali, and I said, I realized from another podcast that I'm a binger, or I was a binger, and I can go without sweet stuff permanently. Doesn't bother me.
Yes.
But with my day job, if I go, sometimes I have to go away and there'll be meetings and stuff. And come morning tea, you'll go out there into the outside room where all the food is, and there's all sorts of cakes and biscuits and just sweet crap. And as soon as I've had one, I cannot stop myself.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, well, I'll eat myself silly today and tomorrow I'll get back to it. And tomorrow I do. But once I've had that one, it's just like I can't stop.
Yes, I can totally understand that. That was me too. Like, oh, let's have one little cookie. Okay, before we know it, half the sleeve of
Yeah.
cookie is gone. You're right, you know, or you're sneaking them away from your kids. Like, I bought these cookies for my kids. Let me find a place to
Yeah.
have them so they don't eat them. So when I need my sugar fix, I can find them. So yeah,
Yeah.
I like that for so many years. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It would have been, it would have been very difficult. So with regard to, so when you say, like, for example, you were on your liquid diet and stuff, and you said when you say they, who are you talking about?
Well, with that particular program, I was actually in a hospital supervised program. So the doctors would come. I'd have to see the doctors, I believe, every other week. I would go to group meetings every week where like a nutritionist or a registered dietitian would teach us things. There was a lot of behavior modification group meetings as well too. So the doctor would come in and he'd be like, "You still have metabolic syndrome. You have metabolic syndrome. You like keep doing what you're doing. You're losing the weight. This is great." So by they, I mean those healthcare practitioners that were not sharing what I believe now is like the knowledge that I needed. But the good news is that one of the doctors that was in that program, she left the weight loss clinic and it was a hospital program of my local hospital. She left and she became a functional medicine doctor, and she's an MD. And I eventually reconnected with her during my keto journey, and she helped me out a lot. And she was very interested and intrigued in my lifestyle and very supportive of it. And she and I had conversations about how we regret the time that I spent in that program. Would have been better to like know all the things that I know now that I didn't discover until I was 50. I did the hospital program as I was turning 40. So there's always something about turning a new decade in age that motivated me a little bit extra. So yeah.
Yeah, because you're thinking, right, new, what is it? A new decade. Let's not make this the same as the previous decade. Let's make a change.
Exactly.
And that lasts for a wee while, of course. So with regard to these hospital foods, now the reason I ask this is because I've had a few people, 3 in fact, who have been hospitalized, and that's why I asked about when you said they. So you just went in there on once a week or something to have the dietitian poke and prod at you, and then give you a new list of foods not to eat and to eat.
Right.
With these 3, all 3 of them were hospitalized because of one reason or another, health or, mainly health. And in all 3 instances, they were put on basically a vegan diet. So
wow.
Was yours, did you have meat in part of it? Did they suggest meat? Were they happy with meat?
Unfortunately, I don't have the ingredient labels still from those protein shakes that I did drink, but I did go and look at them, and they were loaded with sugar. But they did, the main focus was protein. They wanted to make sure we got the protein in from those protein shakes.
Yeah,
But then when they put us, we're going to switch you over to real food now. It was, I would say it was very similar to the standard American diet plate that I've been told about in other types of weight loss endeavors, like, eat the 3 ounces of chicken, and then, eat the healthy starches, and then have a side of vegetables, eat your 4 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. So they did want you to get your protein in, but I would not say it was protein focused at all. It was more like the standard, this percentage of your plate should be protein, carbohydrates, healthy carbohydrates, grains were included. So, yeah.
Okay. I guess it would be difficult if you're used to eating lots of carbohydrates. Like you said, you're half a potato, so you found the biggest possible potato you could possibly have.
Right.
And then your half may have been a little bit slightly over the halfway mark and so on. So it would have been difficult. So then you, at some stage, therefore, and I know you mentioned it before, you were into Googling and you came up with another thought process apart from Weight Watchers.
Yes. As I was approaching the age of 50, I was on an anniversary trip with my husband. I had recently weighed myself a few months prior to that, and I was devastated because I was the highest weight I have ever been on a scale, and that was 230 pounds. And that was higher than my 2 pregnancies. Like I had gotten to, it was again soul crushing. I'm like, how can I possibly weigh more than I did when I was pregnant with my 2 kids? So that was 2015, and went on this little anniversary trip in the fall in September, and I couldn't climb. Like I could not catch my breath to climb a fairly moderate path that I should have been able to climb if I was fit and healthy. So my husband went on without me, and he came back down the mountain path because he wanted to go see this lake. We were in Rocky Mountain National Park. Beautiful. Okay. So I didn't get to see a lot of it. But I came home from that trip with a new resolve, because my husband also told me during that trip, my snoring was out of control because we were in a much higher elevation than we live in. And he couldn't get any sleep. And I felt so bad for him, like bless his heart. I felt so bad for him. So those 2 things is really where I claim that as my turning point coming home from that mountain trip. So I set up a sleep study, which I had been putting off for 10 years. I knew that I needed a sleep study. I knew that I had obstructive sleep apnea. I did not want a CPAP machine, but I will swear and testify all day, every day now that that CPAP machine changed my life. So that was my first step.
Okay.
And then the chronic health issues started mounting up around the same time that fall. I began having painful ovarian cysts. So my doctor ordered an ultrasound of the abdominal cavity, of my abdomen. And that's when it was discovered that I had fatty liver disease. She kind of poo-pooed it because she's a gynecologist. She was like, "Yeah, you need to keep an eye on that. Here's a one-page document of foods like you should eat to diet, right?" She said, but we were keeping an eye on the cyst, right? So I did my own research. This is where Dr. Google came into play. I began doing my own research, and I wanted to know why my liver was full of fat. And then I learned the key is that sugar is a major hormone disruptor. My liver was full of fat because of how everything was being metabolized. And so that is really what got me thinking. And it took me a while to make that first decision. So I discovered that like in early January of 2016. And on March 10th, so 2 months, I'm ruminating this in my head. I have to quit sugar. I have to quit sugar. I have to quit sugar. And on March 10th, 2016, I took my first I quit sugar journey, and I ditched coffee and flavored cream, cold turkey, because I was having a little bit of coffee with a ton of flavored cream in it. So that was my first quitting sugar step. And then I just kept building on that. A couple days later, I swore off the treats that you talked about in the office. Our office was loaded, the break room, the lunchroom, treats everywhere. I worked with a bunch of women, so imagine it being 10 times worse. But so I swore off all the treats. And then I started reading ingredient labels and got to the point where within maybe like 4 to 6 weeks, I realized I was no longer craving sugar. I was no longer craving the sweet sugar. And I felt like it was a miracle. That was my first taste of freedom that I had in this journey.
Now, incidentally, for listeners who don't know what 230 pounds looks like, my trusty calculator says it's 104.5 kilograms. I can't change that into stones. I should be able to by now. I can't remember how many. I think there might be 6.5 kilos to a stone. But anyway, 104.5 kilograms, and I weigh 73.
Wow. So, and I'm only 5'1" tall. I'm only 61 inches tall.
Wow.
I'm short.
Okay. Yeah. So it gives people an indication when they think of themselves, and you think, oh, hang on, I'm such and such, whether it's kilograms or pounds, it lets you be able to make that comparison.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and it is amazing when you start looking at food labels. It's interesting that you mentioned food labels because, of course, you can think, oh, I'll buy these sausages. They're all right. They're going to be full of protein and a bit of fat, a bit of healthy this and a bit of healthy that. And you look at them and, how come it's 30% protein? How come it's 30% carbohydrates?
Yeah.
Of which, 25% of those are sugars. It's like, what the hell? And, of course, then you realize that these lovely sausages are full of bread. And then they throw in a bunch of sugar to make it taste better. And the sugar could have all sorts of names to it, but that's why just looking at the carbohydrate label is quite a handy. So that is interesting. Hey, can you get back to, for any listeners who, when you mention metabolic syndrome, can you explain that a little bit in more detail, as in what it is?
Yeah, so at the time, the metabolic syndrome, I remember them showing me a chart, and now I know more about it. There's if you check off 5 of the 6 syndromes or 6 symptoms, then they could diagnose you with metabolic syndrome. And it's like having a large waist circumference, having high cholesterol, having high blood pressure. It's just saying that your body's not working well together. All of these signs are an indicator that you are metabolically dysfunctional. Also, I don't remember anybody saying to me at that time that you can say it's very similar to somebody telling you are insulin resistant or you have hyperinsulinemia. nobody took the time to explain to me the role of insulin in our health. And the thing that keeps me grounded in continuing to make good choices for my life is knowing that insulin is our fat storing hormone. Insulin serves many benefits in the body. We need insulin, obviously. But for me, I like to think of it like this is one of the signs and symptoms of why I was led into or why I ended up being morbidly obese is I had no knowledge of this. And now my goal, and anybody that has been diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, the good thing to think about is like what is going on metabolically in my body, and how can I help? How can I help stabilize my insulin hormone so that it's functioning in a healthy way?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And of course, you've nailed it because you've said, right, I'm going to get rid of sugars. So,
yes.
And insulin resistance and fatty liver, of course, they go together quite well. Mm-hmm. It's a wonder they didn't think you're an alcoholic, let's face it. Oh, you got fatty liver, you must be an alcoholic. How many drinks do you have each night?
Right. I can't remember if my doctor asked me that, but if she would have asked me, I was not a drinker. I like every once in a while I'll drink some red wine now, but I was not. I never had a history. I didn't even start drinking wine till I was like in my late 40s, so it's not didn't have a history of that. So
because of course people used to only get fatty liver from being from drinking too much alcohol.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, I don't know, I think it was in the 60s, 70s, people started to there was more and more frequency of fatty liver showing up as a problem from people who, like you say, weren't heavy drinkers. And that's where now, because of course the sugar had the same effect on the poor old liver, which is the liver is it's the big roundabout in your body that says all the sugar has to come through me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think of it as like this little cleaning function that it's doing all day, every day. It's like, why do I don't want to damage my liver. And at the point when it was discovered that my liver was full of fat, it was still something I learned that I could reverse it, that I could heal my liver, that I could, fix this. And then the idea of like moving into eventually it could become cirrhosis of the liver, which is then you're in trouble because that's harder to reverse or to manage or not destroy your entire health. So.
Okay. So getting rid of sugar would have been a huge start. Your liver must have said, oh, thank goodness. Right. I don't know what she's doing to me, but just keep that up.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and incidentally, and I might be jumping the gun here, how did you get insulin tested in the future? How did your insulin go? Was there a time frame where your insulin resistance started to unresist?
Yes. Yeah, actually.
That's not a scientific word, by the way. Unresist.
I know too. And this is as sciencey as I get through Dr. Google, right? But
right.
I did have a particular interest in like what is going on with my insulin hormone, and through being involved in the X community, learning a lot of stuff. Dr. Georgia Eid has a really neat handout that people can like do some formulas, calculations about this. I recommend that all the time, but that's how I connected back up with my doctor, that she was now a functional medicine doctor. And I just really kind of geek out on all this stuff. So I wanted to know where I was going. And of course, in the US, doctors don't regularly order a fasting insulin test. So we actually have to ask for it. A lot of doctors won't do it. And fortunately she would, because she was super intrigued by what I was doing. And I did see my insulin hormone, the numbers kept going down, down, down and healing. And eventually I could say, like, I have put my insulin resistance into remission. I could just as easily put it out of whack again if I choose to go back on eating a diet high in carbohydrates. So, I don't want to do that, obviously.
No. And incidentally, for listeners, the phrase was fasting insulin. So if you go to the doctor and they say, don't eat breakfast, then don't eat breakfast, because it's a fasting insulin. They want to test your insulin without loads of food circulating through your stomach. So, and that will tell them the right information. If you go and have breakfast when you're not supposed to, then that's going to tell them it's going to give them a false reading of your insulin. Just a bit of FYI.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. So then you cut out sugar. And would you have said beforehand that you were addicted to sugar, or was it? I mean, you said actually it was quite easy for you to start reducing your sugar intake, which was a positive sign.
That was positive because I did it step by step. Now, I admire the women that I coach that come in and they're like, okay, everything's gone today. But I see people having better success when they like take it step by step. And so it was just a few short days later that I'm like, okay, I'm swearing off the candy in this office. This is ridiculous. And then, just keep going. But the interesting thing, Peter, is that I was not eating sugar, the white stuff, like the sweet stuff, the brown sugar, or any sugars that were added to ingredient labels in the grocery store. But I was still eating bread, potato, pasta, rice.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd never heard the word ketogenic diet. I'd never heard about the low carb lifestyle. This was just, I'm quitting sugar because it's bad for my liver. And I was very frustrated by the lack of weight. Like, I was feeling better. My headaches were dissipating. I would have more energy. I was sleeping better, of course, because I had the CPAP machine now too. Yep. But I was super frustrated by the slow weight loss. In 10 months, I only lost 18 pounds from quitting sugar. And I was having a conversation with a friend at lunch, which, by the way, at lunch, we had steak, potato, bread, and salad at a restaurant. And she said, hey, she's really into hormones. She's like, hey, have you ever heard about the practice of fasting? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm a believer. We talk about fasting in church all the time. She's like, no, this is fasting for your health. And so she told me about Dr. Fung. And that night I went home, and that's when I Googled, did another random Google search. And I typed in fasting and hormones. And the number one hit came up, and it was Diet Doctor popped up right at the top. And it was I think it's 5 short videos that Dr. Fung does on there called What is Fasting? That's the video series that changed my life. And that's when I learned that the bread, the potato, the pasta, the rice, those were the things that I was still including in my diet. Even if I thought I was doing them in moderation, I was still taking the advice to fill up my plate, 60% carbohydrates. I was also at that time in the diabetes prevention program because I had been diagnosed as pre-diabetic.
Understandably, if you'd had bad insulin, then that's,
yes.
Is an insulin resistance and pre-diabetic are these days considered pretty much the same thing, aren't they?
Right. Yes. Yeah. They would, like, one thing is the other thing. And it's just progressive, unless you make a change in the way you're eating. So I was in this program, and the program was recommending that we eat 5 to 6 meals a day. I was eating oatmeal first thing every morning with blueberries and brown rice syrup, because I thought that was like a better sugar to have, but that was not a better sugar to have in hindsight. So I'm eating this oatmeal first thing when I get to the office, and I wasn't even hungry. And so one of the things that Dr. Fung says in these videos, like, why are you eating if you're not hungry? And I was just like, this is mind blowing. Like that video series changed my life.
It's funny, isn't it? It's so simple. Why are you eating if you're not hungry? And for you, it's like a light bulb moment.
Yes.
Whereas if you're in the wild, of course, you're thinking, oh, I'm hungry. I better go and catch another critter so I can eat.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I learned so much from that video series. It was like they were 5-minute videos. 5-minute videos changed my life. That's also where he said, like, this is not your fault. You've been given bad advice all these years. But I walked away from that that really resonated with me. It gave me, like, it helped me release a lot of the guilt and shame that I had been carrying for decades. But it also made me recognize that, okay, this might not be entirely my fault. It is somewhat my fault because I had been guilty for many years of secret eating, sneaking, lying. As a child, I'm sure I stole lots of cookies out of the cookie jar.
But hang on.
Yeah,
In your defense,
yeah,
you can say, I did all of that. I was a bad person. But the
uh-huh,
other side of it is somewhere in your subconscious was
yeah,
saying, I need to do this. I want to
right,
do this. I need to do this. I'm prepared to take the gamble of getting caught
yeah,
and getting told off for the
right,
purpose of stealing some extra food. That's not something, you're not doing that just for giggles. You're
no,
doing that because
no,
something inside you is saying, I need more
yes.
food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
So,
know, and I realize all this now in hindsight, like as I'm studying and learning about the food addictive behaviors that I had, the sugar addictive behaviors that I had,
yeah.
for sure and for certain. But now that I know I have this problem, now it's my responsibility to do something about it. And
Yeah.
that's what I
That's right.
walked away from those that
Mm.
video series. I'm like, and now I have a plan. And it was so simple. Stop eating when you're not hungry. And hey, did you know that grain, rice, potato, pasta, did you know that those are they're like, you might as well pour a jar of sugar into your stomach as soon as it gets there.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. Yeah.
And I think that's really important because so many people think, oh yes, I've gone healthy. I'm going to really up my health because I'm only going to eat potatoes and rice and pasta, and I'm not like you just said, I'm not going to eat any sugar, any processed food. I'm going to be so healthy. It's like,
Yes.
I hate to break this to you, but you've become healthier. Like you said, you had become healthier by removing the sugars, and I
Yes.
guessed a lot of the processed foods in the process. But yeah, you still had that big elephant in the room.
Exactly.
Mm,
Right. And it was like, again, it was mind blowing. It was like this light bulb aha moment. And
mm,
for me, that was the last day I ate bread, potato, pasta, rice. That day I learned that information was the last day I ate that. And I believe that for me, it was easier to step away from those things, to walk away from those things without insane cravings driving me insane because I had already quit the white stuff. I had
yeah,
already quit sugar. Yeah.
yeah. And I know I keep interrupting you, but this is all
That's
really pertinent stuff. I've written a book about the ketogenic diet and stuff.
okay.
It's available. But in there, I talk about cold turkey because I was cold turkey. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, go to your cupboard, empty your cupboard out of all the crap, and here's a list, and it's quite an extensive list.
Mhm.
Here's the stuff you can put back into your cupboard. There's not much to it because most of it's fresh. Um, and stop eating today. Now, you're the second person because there was a lady called Donica who has got a meetup group, keto for keto for mental health. So she advocates. She's an advocate for mental health using the ketogenic therapeutic diet. Um, and she said the same thing as you. She said, "No, I prefer to wean people off." And it was the first time I'd heard that. I thought, how can you do that? How can you wean off? But I can see now that there's certainly two sides. I think to a certain degree, perhaps it's your mentality. Can you wean off, or do you just have to go cold turkey? But
Right.
both of them are going to get to the same end result, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. And like I've been coaching women for a while now, and I can identify the people that should definitely go cold turkey, and then I can see the people that, or I can recommend to the people. I do discuss that with them when we connect. Like, this is what your plan should be, and these are the reasons why. So there is two different thoughts of that, and there's two different success paths, and yeah, it
Yeah.
I admire the people that can go cold turkey for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Upon saying that, I also say, by the way, on day 4 or day 5, you're going to feel like crap
Yeah,
because that's when the keto flu is going to come and
right,
smack you over the back of the head.
right.
But on the plus side, if that was on day 4, then by day 6 or 24 hours later, you're going to feel amazing.
You made it.
Yeah,
Right.
and let's face it, if you go online and you have a bunch of people telling you why not to do keto, invariably people will be going on about the keto flu, and it's a flu-like symptoms and you're going to feel terrible. They all forget to tell you it's only going to last for a few hours,
Right.
but they make out as if you're going to have that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And let's face it, most of the people who write that stuff are people who have never done a
Mm-hmm.
ketogenic transformation anyway.
Right. Right.
They're all regurgitating what they've read from someone else.
Oh, yes.
So how long will it have taken you, and how long do you advocate for people who are weaning from start from I've just wandered in, I'm eating all sorts of crap, all sorts of carbohydrates and everything and sugar, to when I'm going to be carbohydrate sugar free? How long would that take me?
I hope within like a short 2 to 3 week period,
Okay.
because I would like, my ultimate goal is to get them to eliminate the need for the sweet taste on their tongue, and to we're big about talking about cravings in the community too. It's like, it is totally possible to bust these cravings, and it's like mind blowing when you do, and you wake up one day and you realize, like, I'm not being driven insane by cravings. So the very first thing I was like, the sweet sugar has to go, and then the next is the starches, and then then I like encourage them to clean up, like stop using seed oils, things like that too. So within a few short weeks, they should be on their way. Yes.
Okay, great. So at that stage, then they've got rid of their, and it's interesting you mentioned seed oils as well, which is such a biggie that people just understandably don't think about. One of my neighbours said the other day, I'm in the UK, I'm in Yorkshire in the United Kingdom, and she said something like, "Oh, but the it's not illegal, so it must be okay." And as much as the government hasn't said it's not illegal, and the government must look after us, so it must be okay. It's like, no, the government, well, it has potentially different agendas. It has to look after all the farmers who are producing the vegetable oil. It's got taxes coming in from the vegetable oil. And I guess the government could say in defense, oh, but there's no definitive scientific evidence to prove all of these. But there's hundreds of definitive evidence, scientific evidence to prove the inflammation and the physical damage that vegetable oils and seed oils are doing to people. But there's still, you go into any shop and all you can get is seed oils and a little bit of olive oil, and if you look really hard you'll find a little cake of lard, a little block of lard somewhere. And then you got all your margarines, and then if you look really hard you'll find the butter.
Right. Right. And I used to feel guilty about choosing butter, like when I wanted to choose butter, for just because I liked the taste of it. This is even when I was overweight, and then margarine was the selection. Like, this is heart healthy. And now I have not done a deep dive on all the science behind the seed oils and stuff. All I need to know is that it is processed in a factory like that. And I just don't want it. It's so questionable about the process of making those seed oils. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. So you've got rid of so you had lost about 18 pounds with your just by getting rid of the sugars and stuff, and you came to a stagnation, and then you got rid of your starches.
Yes.
So carry on with the story then. And my apologies for interrupting you for the last half an hour.
Oh, you're fine. This is how we would talk if we were actually sitting down over coffee.
That's right. Exactly.
Which is my favorite thing to do, is to have coffee chats with people.
Yeah.
So then that day, January 13th, 2017, is the day I discovered keto and the intermittent fasting lifestyle. I immediately ordered The Obesity Code by Dr. Fung. I devoured that book as soon as it arrived. The next book I read was Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes. And just began devouring all of this information that was changing my life. Very quickly, that first month, I believe I lost about 12 pounds. Like the weight just started melting off. Within 6 weeks, I had lost as much weight as I had lost as 10 in 10 months after,
Mm.
just with the quitting the sweet stuff, sugar, the white stuff. So it was just amazing to me that I knew I had found the key to unlock my decades of obesity, and I knew that I was eating whole and healthy foods. I was like, keto gets knocked around so much in the media and by naysayers, and I will push back if people challenge me. I'm like, how can you go wrong with eating whole healthy foods? I call it God's good smorgasbord. It's created and it's you. It's like that's how God created it for me. And like I'm like, I promise you, I'm not sitting around eating a stick of butter every day. Okay,
Oh,
if that makes you feel better, if it's a personal friend I have or a family member, I'm not sitting around eating eating
mm.
a stick of butter. I am choosing. I'm focusing on my protein. I will have some, low carb sides, very low carb vegetables. So, yeah, I just can't believe how the fat, like turning into a fat burning machine, how efficient it was to remove this extra weight. And also, I was able to ditch my CPAP machine. I had a repeat sleep study, and the doctor literally did a happy dance in his office. And he says, "This never happens to my patients. This never happens. Nope. I don't ever tell people you can stop using your CPAP machine because you no longer have obstructive sleep apnea, which is different from central sleep apnea, by the way, for any listeners.
Oh,
There,
okay.
there's a big difference. You don't want to go off a CPAP machine if you have central sleep apnea. So I
Okay.
did, with my doctor's permission, I ditched my CPAP machine. When I got to a healthy weight and I maintained a healthy weight for about 6 months, my doctor reordered, my functional medicine doctor that I had reconnected with, she
Yeah.
reordered an abdominal ultrasound, and my liver was no longer full of fat.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up on covers of magazines, because the special edition says heal your liver. And I was able to do that. I healed my liver. So, yeah. And then I ultimately got to a healthy weight, which I have never been able to do in my 30 years of dieting history. So,
So
finally.
that's funny, isn't it? Because when you were doing this, just with knocking out your carbs and so on,
Mhm.
were you hungry? How did you know? I mean, you've said, okay, I'm going to eat when I'm hungry,
Mhm.
but did you ever track your calories?
I did use the Carb Manager app often, off and on. Like I wasn't doing it daily, but I would check in with myself every once in a while. But the one of the things that I had a takeaway from very early on when I learned about the keto lifestyle is to eat until you're satiated and make sure to include the healthy fats. I no longer feared healthy fat, and I felt full. I could honestly, it was shocking to me that I could go from meal to meal and not be grazing, not be snacking. And my rhythm fell into eating twice a day. I would get hungry around 11:30 a.m., so I would eat a lunch. And then
Yep.
I would get hungry again around 5:30 p.m., so I would eat a healthy dinner. And then no snacking in the evening. I wasn't hungry. So, of course, there's a lot of emotional and behavioral modification that comes into play with all of this. But I really did truly learn how to recognize true hunger signals, the difference between true hunger, head hunger,
Yeah.
boredom hunger, all the things that used to lead me astray and had me like running to the pantry and trying to.
But this is the huge thing, is because earlier on, near the start, you mentioned one of your many diets, which was 800 calories a day.
Yes.
And it didn't work particularly, apart from making you feel, I'm sure, miserable and permanently hungry.
Yes.
And it didn't work. All it probably did was damage you. It
Yep.
probably allowed your body would have catabolized half of your muscle mass in the process instead of your fat. It probably was chewing away on your muscles instead.
Yeah.
All of that, and here you go, and you'd switch to another diet. Let's call it a fad diet, because that's what people like to call it.
Yes.
A fad diet that's been around for only 600,000 years.
Century.
And yeah, and without even worrying about feeling hungry, you managed to lose all that weight. And that's the remarkable, amazing thing. And it fixed your fatty liver.
Yes.
And fixed your sleep apnea.
Yes.
And I would have thought a few other things. One thing I was thinking of asking earlier on when you were obese, your words, not mine, because it's one of those words that people don't like.
Mm-hmm.
How was your mental health? Did you have any issues in that regard? So that's halfway through podcast 31, and podcast 32 is right behind it. So if you'd like to hear what happens with Christine, then tune into podcast 32. Thank you very much.